Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Organize, a webinar series on organizational capacity building. I am your host, Leisha McKinley Beach. The Emory University Campus Coordinating Center created these monthly webinars as a way for the busy nonprofit professional to get a quick training and some resources to help their organization function at its highest level. I am super excited about today's webinar, Meaningful Engagement of Volunteers in the Age of Social Distancing. This webinar provides information for nonprofits who are utilizing volunteers during this pandemic. So I know that many of our agencies wouldn't survive without volunteers. And Mr. Dandridge is going to provide us with information to uplift, engage, and protect those who are serving within our organizations. So give me an opportunity to introduce our dynamic speaker on this afternoon. Antoine Dandridge is a 10-year volunteer and community engagement leader with specializations in the following areas: reproductive rights, healthcare access and equity, civic engagement, fundraising, campus organizing, and volunteer diversity. And he has created trainings and curriculums around volunteer diversity. Since 2018, Antoine has been a consultant with startup nonprofits and mentoring new volunteer coordinators. So we got an expert today, y'all. Antoine continues to explore and share new solutions to train, empower, and retain volunteers even during this COVID-19 pandemic. He invites you on a journey to release the old and accept new opportunities during the rise of virtual volunteer engagement. So Antoine, thank you so much for giving of your time this afternoon and sharing with our organizations how we still make this volunteer program work in this now virtual environment. The floor is yours, Mr. Antoine.
Well, first of all, after the introduction, I'm just floored and I feel so honored to be here. And I just want to thank you for such a wonderful opportunity to speak with organizations. This topic is even more special to me because I actually survived COVID, during the pandemic. So even still having to manage volunteers and interns during this process has not only been a part of the work, but it's also been rewarding to me to have so much support in return, and just goes to show how amazing our communities are as we're doing this work. So just, please understand that this has been a journey for all of us as organizers and leaders, and but we can do this. I'm excited about it. So thank you so much, Ms. Beach, for that.
And can I say, Antoine, before you start, dear, we're so thankful that you are still here and that you have survived and are now thriving beyond this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, well, I had a sort of an introduction for myself that I no longer need to do because I think that Ms. Beach covered all of that and maybe even a little bit more. So we're going to just dive on in. So today we're going to have a nice little chat about meaningful volunteer engagement. And really just want to understand, starting out, that COVID has impacted us across the boards, in our families, with our jobs, in our careers. Volunteers especially would be people who are hugely impacted. These are people who donate their time. They work for free for our organizations because they truly believe in our mission. They want to see us succeed. And I think that we owe them the security of making sure that they're safe, and that they feel that our missions will continue, and they actually have a hand in that. And so we want to use every tool, resource, and opportunity to keep them involved in the work, because that's what they signed up to do and they want to do it. So we have to make sure that we keep our inroads open for that. Just kind of moving along to the next slide. All right, so how did COVID impact our volunteer programs? Obviously, we had to stop. I mean, I remember the day that I heard about COVID from a work perspective. I mean, we had to pause all of our operations. Obviously, that was a huge blow because we had things that was already pre-planned and needed to get done. Several of my clients were calling. People really didn't know what to do. We were concerned about the environmental threats that COVID, presented to us as staff members, to our families. It canceled and paused on location events. I mean, so the way that we were working and navigating our day-to-day operations from a physical standpoint immediately ceased. A lot of us as volunteer organizers, we felt sort of a low blow with the value of our work. Like, will we still be valuable to our organizations during COVID? Do people still need volunteers? And the answer is yes. So just in case you're concerned about that and having those feelings, those are real feelings. It is okay. It created communication barriers. Obviously, we had to remove, the in-person communication pieces, things that, we could communicate, via email or text or phone, kind of became sort of a hybrid communication space. We had to really learn how to find people and meet them where they were in this situation, and being, empathetic about ways that people wanted to be communicated with, and how they wanted to be communicated to. It revealed, though, on the other hand, COVID, after about maybe a month or two in the process, organizations and leaders and strategists began to realize there were some new discoveries that happened. COVID is still teaching us new things. We're still learning to engage our volunteers and our staff who manage volunteers differently. So that was a thing. I'm sure a lot of you have had to experience low turnout rate for events since COVID. Virtual events can be extremely fun and festive and have a lot of engagement. Some of them not so much, but it's okay. I definitely would say don't get caught up in the numbers with this opportunity, but get more engaged with the output, and we'll talk more about that. What happened to your emails? Where are your open rates? Are they higher? Are they lower? Who's responding and what are they responding to? We'll talk a little bit more later about targeted messaging that can reach your volunteers where they are right now, and hopefully get them involved acutely in what you're doing. So it may mean a little bit more communication via multiple platforms of communications, and we'll talk about that a little later. So just remember right now, this is very important. Being safe right now during this COVID era with your volunteers is productive. So maybe not having to have an event or cancel an event during this particular time, it is still productive if people are being safe. Having to rework plans on how to engage people, or if you're planning to possibly do some events where people will show up, making sure people understand exactly how to proceed with these is very productive. And if it takes more time, if it means that you have to push some things back in your work world to make that happen, being safe is productive. If people are not safe, we're not being productive people. So just keep that in the forefront. So managing volunteer safety, from what I understand, that's just been, it's a hot topic right now with volunteer leaders and those of us who organize and work with people who give their time and service to our organizations. And, just off top, we know a lot of this, and I put these things in writing because I wanted people to be able to see this and be able to hopefully take some notes from this. And just being reminded, and I'm sure a lot of us are already doing some of these things, but I'll just review, making sure that we're implementing the most current CDC guidelines for COVID-19. You remember when this first started, it was, the 14 days, and now I think that day has been reduced to 10, and, really making sure that we are, still using our hand sanitizers and washing our hands, giving people notes, encouraging people to stay home if they're not sick, and having workaround plans for those who can't show up to events. Obviously, we're eliminating this as well by continuing to not do physical events while people may be slowly but surely returning to work. I know for most clients that I work with and even organizations that I personally work with, we're still choosing to stay virtually distant at this point. It's a safe thing. And also too, people just have so many different things that they have to manage right now. So keeping people at bay is still kind of a best, practice, but we want to talk about how to dig into that work and go deeper, but not necessarily, eliminating volunteerism from your organizations. So this time I'm gonna tell you something. A great way to engage volunteers is through self-care. So any webinars or virtual events you can do around people taking care of themselves is always a win. And just think of creative ways to do that, and we can talk about that too a little bit later. Making a decision to postpone or cancel events, is happening. I think what we're learning is that there's so many things that would just change anyway as a result of this. So start thinking about type of practices and events that you want to stop, that you want to start, and that you want to continue. Now, how can you transition this into a place that it doesn't always have to be face-to-face? Virtual working opportunities had already been on the rise, pre-COVID, and now that we're in COVID, it's just forced us to make this decision a lot faster. So we don't think a lot of these things are going to really switch back. It's really just so making an acceptance of what it is right now. So that's where we are with that. Okay, in the same vein of managing volunteer safety, a lot of people have been asking about, what kind of agreements do we need? Or how do we communicate this to our volunteers? And so typically in an organization, if you're like, if you have volunteers that are completing like applications, or if they are wanting to get involved in some capacity where they may have to report to you, or they may have to show up at a thing, or distribute some wellness items in the community, whatever type of process or operation that you are managing them, you want to make sure some key things are included in the COVID agreement. And here's just some of the ones that I thought that were pretty universal across the board. So what I did, I wanted to, in addition to things that I know, practices that I know that I'm using, I did speak to other volunteers and volunteer directors and organizers and managers to see what they were doing. And here's kind of the gist of what we've come up with. Make sure you outline procedures before, during, and post volunteer shifts in your agreement. Detail the mask and glove requirements. Explicitly name the maximum numbers of volunteers per shifts that are able to be in one space and how they communicate. So they may say, they may simply name, stay 6 feet apart, don't open doors for people, just kind of keep your distance, but being able to function your duties around that, explicitly name what that is. Explain any duties around temperature checks and any disinfecting protocols. Make sure you wipe down the chair that you sat in before you leave, all this type of stuff. List a staff member point of contact. So there need to be someone on your staff who manages volunteers, or someone who is responsible for safety management or hazardous management for your organization, who they can contact if they have questions about this. In most of our cases, this is probably going to be whoever your volunteer coordinator, manager is, or your organizer is for this particular, position. Definitely make sure we ensure that volunteers know to stay home if they have any physical symptoms, and make sure you explicitly name the steps of how they report that, who they report it to, and in the time that you suggested they were supported, so that you have time to get someone else in to do that particular position or to counsel those operations for that particular time frame. I think if you have those details inside of that agreement, you're pretty much on point with what's happening across, people I've talked to in this region at least, and you should be good to go. It's very simple. If you have questions about it, I'm glad to help anyone out with that if you have questions later. So volunteer communication, I'm gonna tell you right now, just be agile. And what I mean by that is, meet your people where they are. I know like before COVID, we all kind of like ran our own show, and we had our processes and how we communicate with people, and people knew how to find us if they need us. COVID kind of requires us to do a little bit more. We have to kind of really be a little bit more personable during this time. And I'll give you some details about what I mean. So listen, consistent communications is I say it's king. Some people may say it's key, but I say it's king. I'm not saying like over communicate with people. You don't want people really avoiding your communication, or when they see your name, like, oh, what this person want again. But maybe when you do communicate things that are a high priority, that you use a sort of a hybrid of communication methods. I would say as a volunteer person, if you have upcoming events or ways that you want people to be engaged that are, you know, top tier priorities for your organization, I would say send that out in a monthly email. But it's most impactful now if you kind of make a big deal about that message versus putting a whole bunch of different communications on the main page of an email and hoping they find your volunteer event. You may just want to kind of stress like the major points that you're going to have for that particular month. And then of course, there's a place where they can also find other things. But I think emphasizing the big takeaways for that particular month is going to be important. So that's ideal for like even ongoing things that you do, or if you have one big event that's coming up that may be difficult to recruit volunteers for, you want to make a bigger deal about it in the email. And I would say for me, it's been helpful to speak personally about why they're important and what the challenges may be if you don't have enough volunteers for it. People got to be touching their heart a little bit more with our communication right now. Something that's been extremely helpful for me and people who manage multiple volunteer events or organizing events at one time has been using what we call the predictive texting process. Some people use that app called Hustle. There's the link if some organizations take out a subscription to it. But if you don't have Hustle, what I mean by predictive texting platform or strategy, the strategy would be don't just send options for people to opt out. So this is from your organization perspective, people are always going to look for a way out. COVID got people scared, making decisions on not being involved, not coming out the house already. But people are always looking for an out. So some people actually really can do the work they signed up for. They can still uphold their responsibilities to your organizations. They can still do those things. However, if you give them a text message that says, hey, we need volunteers Saturday to come and collect, clothes to take to the shelters. Are you available or not? Yes, reply if you're available or not. They're probably going to choose not. But you may say, hey, Jonathan, we want to be direct. Hey, we would love for you to come out and help us out this week. We have to distribute, tons of clothes to people, and we can really use your energy. Are you available to help us Saturday at 1? Leave it open. Let them respond, yes or no. If they respond, you have a yes response already prepared. Yes, great. We're still working on details, but is it okay if I call you Thursday? Or if it's okay if I follow up your text with the information by Thursday, you want to let them know. Or you may already have the information planned. That's even better. Hey, sign up here via the sign up link, and we'll see you on Saturday. Type of a thing. That's been really helpful, really knowing how exactly where you want your people to move. And so not only does it reduce all of the communication and all the back and forth, it gives people direct information on how they can be involved. You give them a personal touch. You allow them to respond. They had to respond yes or no, and you had to send them the information, and they had to agree to it. But I will say, limit those text messages or those phone banks where you may have a few volunteers or staff members calling people to urgent and high priority turnout events that you may need to have via whether it's a webinar or a virtual event or an event where you may actually need people to come and, do something physical if need be. But people are still willing to do it. Encourage them a little bit more in the text by saying, hey, we know that we don't need a lot of your time if you have an hour or two. Just kind of make it easier for them to say yes. Another way too is kind of like automate your data entry process. This is a great time if you're not familiar with like Google Forms and like different sign software like Sign Up Genius or signup.com, or if you have they have ones that you can purchase. Get familiar with those, because you can actually organize a lot of things without even having to see people. You can collect their timestamps, and you can have all the information you need to report for your grants, all in one swoop without having to really physically sign a paper, which, I think a lot of us kind of gotten away from that anyway, but that's definitely something you should be doing. But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, a warm personal phone call in COVID goes a long way. By simply calling people to do a wellness check, on them and their families and how they're doing, and just letting them know, you know, what you have going on. You would love for them to be involved, and you look forward to them. Is this, if they have questions about it, and so, you know, how can we get you involved today? You know, are you able to come out and help us with this? Or can I put you on the list to follow up with you about this in a couple of weeks? Because I do want to report this up, you know, so, because at the end of the day, our organization work and missions are still important in the middle of COVID. And what our volunteers are, these are people who are high-end supporters of our organization. And they signed on and took an oath to sort of do that. And this is just a time where they simply need our help to help them realize that this is still important and they are still very important and we still need them. All right, so no sweat. I mean, it's a new normal. There's going to be low turnouts. There's going to be resistance. I don't know about y'all, but I get a lot of no's, and I get very few people who show up to events that I could normally get 15, 20, sometimes 40 people to show up at an event, and it's okay. You know, it's just a new normal, but let's start thinking about what we can do with smaller turnouts versus larger turnouts. There's a lot of opportunity in between, and we need to talk about that. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Yes, so low volunteer and turnout, low motivation, it's across the board, and it's not necessarily personal to our organizations. We're all pretty aware of what's happening. I know where I live here in Memphis, a lot of people have their kids in school. They happen to be basically homeschooled or virtually schooled, and the parents have more responsibility than they've ever had. This has been a huge adjustment. So don't let the no's hurt you or discourage you from communicating with your volunteers. They definitely deserve to be communicated with, and they need to be offered those opportunities because they're just stressed out right now. So a lot of these no's are just a no for now. It's not long-term. It's not necessarily personal. They're not flaking on you. They're just dealing with something. So this is the part where we become the empaths that most of us can be, you know, temporarily, just so we can let people know that they're still important. I know some of you are going to see a decrease in email open rates, and it's going to be an increase in flake rates. Like I said, this is all temperamental. I think we have to think about, you know, in the future, what do we want the story to be? Did we only call them when they were important to us, or did we call them when we were important to them and they didn't really know that we were? So we want to keep those relationships really cool and fresh because we're going to need them again. I think we all got our fingers crossed that COVID is going to be a totally temporary experience, right? Oh, we got our fingers crossed on that. Those of us have different methods of believing that it's going to be different. How we do that? Let's plan for that when we communicate with our volunteers. So let's go next. So again, talked about low volunteer turnout. Like I said, not a good emotional place for you right now as organizers to, you know, make a big deal about, you know, high turnout. Don't pressure yourself for that. I will say there are so many more things that you can do with smaller groups. What I have found right now is that with smaller groups, you can actually give them bigger projects. You can use this as a great time for research and development, in a sense, you know, kind of, you know, to really open the floor to see what people are willing to do. I actually have volunteers right now who are doing bigger projects for me, probably projects I never would have asked them to do. They are definitely like training groups, and they are like literally running pieces of programs that volunteers, you know, couldn't do, because you have to remember, they have more time too. They're working from home too. They have a little bit more autonomy with their time and schedule, and they really want something bigger to do. And I think that's been a really beautiful thing. And I think the way that we do that is like when we have those orientations and, you know, 2 or 3 people show up, you know, this is a great opportunity for you to really talk about real challenges behind the scenes within your organization. Volunteers, believe it or not, actually, they want to be an integral part of what you do. Now, we know there are certain jobs they can do, but there are a lot of things that they can do, and there are a lot of talents that they have that they would like to use. I know I have some examples later and some like webinar-based things that volunteers have done and things that I've done that's been, you know, really cool. So I want to like share those with you later. Facilitate discussions about trainings, you know, figure out who one day can be a great volunteer leader. I mean, most organizations define volunteer leaders as people who's done at least 2 or more events. Most of the time, if you can get a person to come to at least 5 or 6 events, they typically are ready to take on something else. You don't want to keep them in the same role. Why not expand that role just a little bit for them, or give them a little bit more responsibility? I mean, and like managing other volunteers or being the point of contact for a particular program. People love it, and it's really good. This is a great opportunity and time to do that. Encouraging group participation. Like, you don't have to have, a presentation where it's just you talking, in a sense. By the way, I want to hear from you guys later. So we're just going to go through these slides and I will hear from you too. So, but that's another thing. I love this one. Go deeper, not lighter. So again, doing deeper level lens work, not necessarily staying, our level with this. And this is not a time to be, well, I don't really want to bug anybody. No, it's okay. People knew that when they signed up that you'll be reaching out to them. This is a time you will have to assert the power that you were authorized by people to contact them and ask them to continue their work and let them know how important that it is that they do it. So yeah, smaller trainings can be great. They're very personable. You get a chance to know people more. You get a chance to do all kind of cool icebreakers. And I would even suggest doing icebreakers that lead to things that you're going to be talking about so that it all makes sense to them. But yet they have a little fun. Make sure they get to know each other. Make sure they exchange phone numbers and get to have communications on how they can work on things together. Now it takes the work off your plate and put it on theirs. And now you become a point person for facilitating events and goals and just different strategies for your orgs. All right, let's go. All right, so let's get real. So we want to be honest about our capacity. I remember when COVID first hit, I felt like I should have been doing so much more, but really there was no way to realistically do more than what I was already doing. And I think that was just different things I had to do. I mean, running so many virtual events was not a thing that I had to do on a regular basis. I was able to have people come to a big training room and I can train them on a big board, and we can serve food, and you organize all these different things. And then when COVID happened, I mean, all of those different responsibilities went out the window, and now I'm basically at home, in my living room trying to figure out, okay, so how are we going to keep all these things going? Well, number one, they weren't all going to keep going. And I really didn't have the capacity to work like I would, because I wouldn't have interns coming in. I wouldn't have volunteers coming in. I didn't have staff support, in a way that I normally would. So we had to really be transparent about that. I would definitely say, like, making sure that for me, I had to communicate up to our, executive leaders, challenges that, I was having with, with capacity at this point, and really trying to manage the demands of our role that was not solely dealing with volunteers versus dealing with volunteers, but I didn't want to make the volunteers feel like they weren't important. So yeah, we stay in contact with them. You continue to have your lunch and learn sessions, or your, whatever you want to call it, events where you come together with them and talk to them and make sure they understand where you are. But for me, it was just really communicating, saying, hey, this is where we at. Just want to check in with y'all, make sure things are good. How are things going in your life? That was it. But that was the capacity at that point. Now what we're finding, as we begin to kind of bite away at this elephant in the room called COVID, we're starting to really grab another rhythm, but it takes time. So if you're restarting programs, it may take you 30 to 60 days to find that rhythm, but you have to start somewhere. And you want to start probably with the lowest hanging fruit from your events. So yeah, just make sure that, be honest about the capacity that you have. Be honest about the challenges that you're having so that people know how to help you. And that even include volunteers. There are people too, and a lot of them have a lot of skill sets that are great for, the work that you're doing, and their role as volunteers, and they're glad to be helpful with that. So we're kind of leaning on each other with that piece. All right, so listen, I don't know about y'all, but volunteering during COVID and any other time is just a strenuous position, especially if you have multiple projects happening with your organization. People right now are just not showing up for things that feel like they got to work. I almost don't want to show up for things when I feel like I got to do all this work. if it's not something exciting and fun and festive and something that really speaks to me, I mean, I'm gonna show up because I'm responsible and I want to do it, but that's not really how you want people to show up. So what are some things that organizations did, to seize that moment of creativity for their volunteers? And that's what we'll talk about. So I hope we got some creative people, because I really want to know what some of y'all think would be great creative opportunities, and I want to encourage you to try it. So one of the things that I did during COVID, believe it or not, it's pretty cool. When the pandemic first hit, volunteers were frustrated, we were frustrated, people upset, they weren't gonna be able to come and fulfill their regular shifts. And our clients calling, they were with the same frustrations, and we had to take a break. And so honestly, I would say about 2/3 of the events that happen are not really per se like mission driven events. Now it's just a really good time, because you have to remember, we can't really have like the in-person volunteer celebrations and parties and events that really uplift the work that our volunteers do. But we do have an opportunity to have something like it. So one of my events that I did to kind of bring people back into the fold and get them back into the mindset of thinking about the mission was, I had an event, I called it Volunteers. And it was like an event everyone had to have like their favorite cocktail or mocktail. And then I invited like an actual bartender to join us on the event, and she made cocktails, and then she showed like the non-alcoholic version way of doing it, and she kind of just had this really cool personality and just had everybody upbeat and laughing, and it was really, really fun. And that happened for maybe almost an hour. And maybe like the last 15 minutes, I just gave a quick update about things that was happening. They have any questions, let me know. And but at the end of the day, it was so good to see everybody. Here's another touch point. And from that point, we start establishing more communication. But people actually get excited about volunteers. So now for a couple of organizations that I work with, that's become a monthly thing. It's not as long as the first one, but it's things like that. I mean, now it's going to emerge, like we'll be doing things like shop talk. So we may have, if you work with organizations of color right now, this is a great time to sort of intersect that work by maybe having like, Black-owned businesses or women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses like show up and talk about their products, introduce them to your people, and let them talk about how things work with their business. It's just been really, really fun. And I think what it's done is made people feel like they're part of something through the work that you do. So just remember, just because you're not really talking about what you do exactly, with your organization, the fact that you're hosting this platform for people still brands and recognizes your organization with people who are actively involved. And that's still great for your marketing. It's still great for your development. It can be great for great fundraising initiatives that you may have in the future, because you're building relationships with people in the community. So just, again, being virtually fun and festive, there is almost no limit. Just make sure you're following your HR protocols, and also make sure that you're being professional at all times, but have a lot of fun. It's just also too, story sharing for your organizations are great virtual things. A lot of organizations have been building their storytelling programs during the time of COVID. And typically the storytelling programs are tough because they're not something you normally have time to do with all the regular, events that happen when, pre-COVID. COVID has put us in a space that we can actually reflect and talk about life the way it used to be, or situations that got us involved with our current organizations. Storytelling opportunities are great. Again, great fundraising opportunities. They are great opportunities to help other volunteers connect with other volunteers along the same veins of these stories that happen. People are feeding off of each other, and it's a beautiful experience to have those moments. So if you have a volunteer who have an amazing story on how they got involved with the organization, or how doing this work has changed them, this is a great piece to incorporate in your virtual volunteer orientations, maybe at the top of the orientation or at the end of the orientation or in the middle or whatever, to help convert people who are interested into actually becoming members of the organization. They're also great for current volunteers who may have lost their steam or may have realize they don't have that passion that they used to have about it. They can now share in that experience and maybe get some new energy. You know, this is a time for energy, y'all. Your energy got to be right. People have to believe you, and storytelling is a great way to do that. And if you don't have that story, help develop that story for someone who do. That is something else that I do in storytelling development. I've been a part of organizations who's raised thousands of dollars off storytelling. And it's an amazing skill and opportunity if it's done the right way. Opening your virtual space to share COVID stories. Everybody have a COVID story. I think when this thing first hit, everyone we knew somebody who was impacted by COVID. And that was just a great way to kind of like have people feel safe and comfortable talking about it. COVID is not taboo. We didn't ask for this. It happened to us. And but we're all impacted by it, and it does impact the way we live and think and how we give back. And but it's not the end, and it's our job as organizers and volunteer leaders and leaders to help people understand that they can still do what it is that they were doing before. We just want to do it a little differently right now. All right. So what else do we have? All right. It looked like, oh, yes. So when you're doing your events and you are, or you've had a presentation or your webinars, just like to always remind folks, to engage for feedback, especially with those smaller groups. I know a lot of times we send out links. I definitely know we have to send those out because they have to be recorded for, managerial purposes. And so people up top can see what's happening. But I also encourage you to have a feedback session that's verbal. Let people just say what it is. Because a lot of times what you're really listening for is you want to make sure volunteers understand like their role as volunteer. They understand what it is that you're looking for. Sometimes I think when I talk to people, I'm telling them, oh, this is what I'm looking for. But then when they call it back to me, I'm like, that's not quite what I meant. So, I mean, we can clear that air and make sure that's very certain. Empower staff who manage volunteers to address solutions with volunteers in particular. Repeat any feedback and suggestions to the group and clarify solutions. But I definitely think what I like to do, honestly, I think volunteers are the best programmers to me, because a lot of times they give me very simple things, or sometimes things that are very complex that I didn't even think about as an objective or a star, to a program that I was creating or to something that I was, organizing or managing or developing. And just having their feedback is important. And that's another thing I definitely want to say. I know a lot of times when we have projects that's going to include volunteers, we like to be the one to do all the creative things with it. But again, this is a great time to, when you have that one volunteer that's always there for you, let's figure out how to promote them. I would say start scheduling. You should have a weekly call with some of your top volunteers every day. Every week you should be following up with your top volunteers. So that means if you have 5 top volunteers, they should all hear from you once a month, at least, maybe even twice, sometimes 3 times if they're working on projects with you. Why? Because you want to show them that their work has value and that they are able to have contact with you. They have access to you. And that means you can also utilize their suggestions because they actually might have the tools and they may have the answers that's going to get other volunteers there. Because you got to remember, volunteers have conversations with themselves that they don't always have with the staff members. So you want to be a part of that conversation too. It'll help you in the future. So let's review some of the best volunteer practices during COVID. Definitely ensuring that volunteers understand that their safety is first. Look at your neighbor and say your safety is first. Your safety is first. Using an electronic method to do that. I think that when people sometimes sign things, they tend to forget what they sign. It's just human error. We want to eliminate that error by making sure that they electronically acknowledge that. If you don't have like an every action system or a system where you can record documents and get signatures, there's a couple things. I think Google Forms is probably one of the most common ones now that people use, where you can put in the verbiage that you want. But I even say once you even include that verbiage, I still say have them go through and check really key points about it. Like I agree to make sure that I'm practicing social distancing. I'm agreeing to do this, at least 3 of them after they've read the whole big document, just to kind of cover the organization a little bit more. But yeah, having electronically keeps it in a place that if you're ever going through accreditation or accreditation with your organization, you can always just download the find an Excel draft and you can send it to whoever needs to see it. And you have a documentation that you've had these conversations and you've sort of explained, well, not sort of, you thoroughly explicitly named what you want them to do, as we mentioned earlier with explaining COVID recommendations for your organizations previously. Making the most of small group turnouts. I mean, like I said, in this particular case, less is more. And what I'm also learning, I think what we're all learning, that, you know, having 100,000 people at an event is not always the objective. You know, you have 3 people that can help you build that back. You know, so 3 people can actually help you find, you know, 25 people. You know, so if you get the right 3, that's what happens. Of course, out of 3, you have 1 or 2 that's really going to do the work, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day, it's about scaling back up. So at this point, if you have any questions and answers, I think we're ready for that.
Antoine, thank you so very much for all the rich information that you have shared with us. I learned some valuable things. You know, I'm old school. I want to see you face to face. I want to be able to reach out and touch somebody's hand. But I can't do that right now. And so, you know, you gave us some valuable information in terms of keeping our volunteers safe, letting them know that they are valued, even when they have to say no. And a lot of this also comes from fear. People are afraid because this is new to us. And even with the no, letting them know how much we appreciate them. Now, I know I'm not the only one who has some questions, so we want to make sure that you're using your chat box and post any questions that you may have for Antoine at this time. Mr. Bannister, are there any questions in the chat feature or questions that have been provided to you directly that you'd like to pose?
Yes, someone had sent me a question directly, and they just wanted to know, as they're starting to open up their facilities, you know, and regarding to providing services, and they want to seek out volunteers, you know, how can they convey that they are you know, being safe is the word within their facility? How can they, I think what they're trying to say is, like, how can they ensure that ensure their volunteers that, you know, they're doing all their precautions, they're being as safe as possible, and to let them know that it's safe to come back, as well as some of their clients?
Gotcha. I think it's that question directly, if I'm being clear on the question, is it ensuring that people are safe to return back into the workspace? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So that's still to be determined. You know, a lot of organizations and companies are still not quite using language for people to come back that are not necessarily essential employees. But I will say, if you do have a situation where people come into the space, like literally, I know some of the COVID agreements that people sign specifically name exactly where they go in the building and where they don't go in the building. So let's just say, like, if you are volunteering, maybe you don't use the restroom where there's like clientele, like if there's a patient center place, like they don't go into that space, they stay out of the clinic because they have their own protocols that they're managing. If you have any products that you're bringing, like that you wear that you use when you're working, the volunteers are responsible for taking those items home and disinfecting them and washing them themselves and logging that they've done that. So I think kind of really like explaining, like really explicitly, like how, or even having a sort of a brief orientation on how they go, and people understand that in a one-on-one conversation, having them sign off on those things kind of make people feel safe. Like, okay, these people are really doing these things. They having this conversation with me, and hopefully they're having this conversation with everyone else. But I think also too, relinquishing the option to have, you know, engagement virtually if they're not able to come physically too. It's still a healthy and viable option right now.
Thank you for that. We have another question here. What are some ways people are utilizing their volunteers remotely?
Oh my God, yes. That's a great question. I do a lot of work around advocacy and engagement. So there are like virtual phone banks. I know one of the things that I did when COVID first hit, and one of the organizations I work with have over 200 volunteers, active volunteers, which means there are more volunteers, but 200 of them have done something within the last year. And we wanted to reach out to all 200 of them. Well, I couldn't personally make 200 phone calls. Well, I probably could have made 200 phone calls, but that's not what the point was. The point was we wrote scripts and we organized volunteers to make the calls from home. So people kind of divided up the list. And so it was easier to get people to make about, you know, to commit to maybe 20 calls, you know, a week until we got, you know, all 200 people taken care of. And there was maybe 4 or 5 people who did that. That was a great thing to do. People who can reach out, you know, to, you know, some of the different like coalition partners that they may work with within your organization. That was one thing. Another thing was I actually started having like volunteers and interns who are also still working right now, you know, hosting virtual events and doing things on their own. So they're able to carry on some of the work that, you know, we were all doing, you know, together anyway, but now they're able to kind of run their own ship with that. So like ideally, I think for me, I started training my interns to do, you know, volunteer orientations. So they may have a volunteer orientation. I may have a volunteer trainer that's going to promote, you know, from the orientation level. And so we just kind of had a chain of events that kind of move people up the ladder, and it was all done virtually. So yeah, empowerment events. Inviting other like community partners that you work with to speak to your volunteers and talk about things that's happening in COVID and what they're doing is also a great way to engage volunteers, but also keep them connected with people. And other than that, I mean, there was some like volunteer jobs that could have just been virtual anyway. I mean, we just kind of figured out how to like kind of all do what we're doing now. We came on Zoom and we kind of worked, you know, the way that we, you know, virtually worked, and had our, you know, check-ins and stuff like that, but just making sure that they had those tools. Yeah, but that was, in short, that was kind of like some of the things that was happening.
Thank you for that. Ms. Alicia, do you have any questions that came to you?
Actually, the questions that I got, Antoine has already answered them. So I don't know if you don't have any other questions. Anyone else who want to give you an opportunity, we have our subject matter expert with us. And so we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. Well, no
I got.
worries.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, well, I got one question in, but this is more so for everyone that we're just trying to figure out how they can get in touch with Antoine. And I just want to let everyone know, like, you know, as you all are listening to our fantastic presenter, Mr. Antoine Dandridge, and then of course the fabulous facilitator, Mrs. Alicia McKinley Beach, that they can all be, you know, accessible through the Compass Initiative, through one of our training, capacity building trainings. If you all would just go to our website, and we will be happy to connect you all with them, apply for training with us, and we can definitely get Antoine to you, probably via Zoom since it's COVID, to help build out some of your volunteer programs, just so everyone knows that before I get, because sometimes I get those questions.
Absolutely. Yes. And I would tell you, like I said, I think the biggest thing right now too is just really being patient, but just sticking to the basics, like your core values of your organization, what it is that you do, you still have to do. And it's just finding new and creative ways to do it. And sometimes, again, I think that it's just really worked out well to create like different roles for your volunteers, and just being very clear about what it is that you expect for them, and just having realistic expectations. for them, as well as your staff who manage them.
Thank you so much. Alicia, we're gonna let you close us on out here.
All right. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Well, excellent. You know, we've learned so much, and this won't be your.
Hold on, you went out. Darren, did we lose Miss Beach?
Uh-oh. We might have lost Miss Beach, but that's all right. I'm here. Before you all leave, I just dropped the link in the chat feature. It will be our survey. Please, if you don't mind filling out our evaluation, it literally will take you 1 to 2 minutes, very briefly, to just tell us what you all thought about the presenter, thought about the way we conducted this webinar, and any other comments for any other future webinars that you all think you might want to see in the future. We have another webinar that's coming up next month on October 7th. Please make sure I got the date right. It is October the 7th, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Please make sure you're on the lookout for our any email blasts that you'll see. And also definitely make sure you follow us on all of our social media here. We're located on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And we also have a YouTube page where all of our webinars will be stored. Thank you so much for being here today. Antoine, any last words you'd like to share with us?
Listen, I just want to encourage people to continue to be safe and have a great time with your volunteers. Ramp up the work. Start planning 2021 right now. So your January calendar should almost be halfway full if it's not already. Let's continue to do the work in our communities and grow the work that we're doing together.
Great words. Thank you all so much. And please remember, if you all would like to work with Antoine in the future, don't forget to make sure you apply for one of our training requests. We'll talk to you all soon and have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.